So I'm excited now to move to our next session. And of course, we're going to have Mr. Spires come up and walk through an incredible session focused on where the landscape is going. Mr. Spires, turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning. My name's Todd Spires. I am a program director for cybersecurity and digital resilience programs at CRDF Global. I am also the co-chair of Working Group D at the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise that is focused on cybersecurity skills and culture. So the skills that our workforce needs in order to close the 3.5 million vacancies that we saw yesterday is near and dear to my heart. Before I get started with the panelists, I want to ask a question. How many of your organizations currently have, by show of hands, an opening for a cybersecurity position? Okay, a few out there. How many of those require a degree? Okay, now, if it requires a degree, does it require a degree because it's a customer requirement or just because it's always been that way? So something to think about. We're going to touch on that during the panel. As we heard yesterday, those cybersecurity vacancies can take up to 21% longer to fill, and in part because of the perceived gap between the requirements in the job rec and the skills that are coming through the door. And so what we hope to explore are solutions for aligning those hiring practices with real workforce needs, strengthening HR capabilities, and hopefully collaboration with the technical teams, and ensuring long-term talent retention, which is a problem in both the public and private sector. So, we're going to get started. We don't have, so I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce yourselves, and then I will start with questions. Godfrey?
Hi, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to be here, to the NICE team and the team from the FIU. I am Lieutenant Colonel retired Godfrey Sterling, the Director of the Cyber Incident Response Team Division in the Office of the Prime Minister in Jamaica.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Kiki Huckabee. I am a Colorado native. I will say if you're visiting, this is very unlike the weather today, so I apologize for that. But I am a Corporate Social Responsibility Manager with IBM.
Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here with you. So many insights already shared in day one. I'm Dr. Emmanuel Sheikh. I'm Associate Vice President for the University of West Florida Center for Cybersecurity, and also serve as the Chief Strategic Alliance Officer for the Global Council for Responsible AI. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So we've got a great mix of industry, of practitioner, and academia. So let's start with identifying and bridging the skills gap. Godfrey, as the practitioner on the panel, what are the most critical skills you're looking for that you're not seeing as you're trying to fill operational positions in a production environment at JASCERT?
Thank you for the question, Todd. The most critical skill that is really missing, especially when I look for the more senior positions in my organization, are the soft skills, the ability to translate technical risk into business impact. Now, if technical development is really meant to spur business growth and sustain that, if you're unable to convince the C-suite of what the impact to the business is, there's a challenge. Additionally, most of the vulnerabilities that we have to treat with in cybersecurity come from poorly developed software. And DevSecOps from the development side, especially where we integrate with our software developers, is significantly missing. And so while we think about how to get the apps out there, and the pandemic would have taught us quite a bit in sort of getting things online very quickly, but security sort of lagged behind, and that created a significant challenge. In the SOC, it's threat hunting and incident response. It's the ability to understand what the kill chain looks like, to understand the frameworks that you're working with, such as the MITRE framework, and the ability to look at what you're seeing in the landscape and translate that into risk and hunt for the vulnerabilities. And finally, most of the entities out there are moving to the cloud. But when you look at the cloud platforms, the skills you're getting from your SOC analysts, that you're getting from your incident responders, does not really suggest that they understand the architecture or the threats to some cloud platforms. And so these are some of the gaps that I see when I look at recruiting.
Yeah, and it's interesting, we talk about emerging technologies, and particularly in an advanced ecosystem like ours, we've been talking about cloud for 10 or 15 years. Well, when we're working internationally, particularly in Eastern Europe and developing less mature cybersecurity ecosystems, they're not even looking at cloud. They want on-prem solutions because they either A, don't trust it, they've got B, data sovereignty issues, or C, they simply don't understand the architecture and how to incorporate that or have the funding to incorporate that in. So emerging tech means a lot of different things depending on the context that you're operating in. Iman, Godfrey talked about some of the soft skills at the mid and senior level, but when we're looking to fill entry-level positions, what is the balance of hands-on boot camps or alternative education paths can play in a candidate evaluation as you're looking through a stack of resumes of people that look generally equally qualified?
I think they should play a huge role because they really provide kind of more authentic measures of learning and of foundational skills. So I was thrilled to hear Godfrey talk about the importance of foundational skills. And so when you think about it, opportunities to learn or to evaluate learners through simulations, boot camps, hands-on learning exercises, cyber drills, capture the flag competitions. Those test not only their technical skills, but also test their foundational skills such as communication, because a lot of times they have to, for example, write a report or do an after analysis as part of that. They test teamwork, they test problem solving, they test critical thinking and analysis. And those are skills, like you mentioned, that are really essential for success. And those can be measured through those competitions and simulation environments a lot better than through kind of traditional learning measures. And what we're finding, for example, is a lot of our employers and partners now want to actually come attend our competitions instead of career fairs. We're so used to inviting partners to career fairs, and they want to know what are the major competitions where students are competing, learning while they're having fun, and they want to see them in action. And sometimes they even offer, do interviews and offer jobs on the spot.
That's outstanding, and that brings to mind the idea of when we're designing CTFs, and I did notice as I was walking past the Evergreen rooms, there is at least one breakout session on redesigning capture the flag competitions for the future workforce. So I would encourage you to check that out if you haven't already picked out a session for the next breakouts. But also designing CTFs with input from the hiring organizations to say, what are the skills that you want to be able to see, and make it a joint endeavor so that they can use it as a test bed to say, okay, we can see these guys doing things we need and we want to hire into. That's an interesting opportunity for partnership. Kiki, one of the things we heard in one of the panels yesterday was an educator at a community college said that 4 of his students placed in the top 100 in a national competition. None of them would be able to get through the algorithm at most major organizations because they don't have a 4-year degree. So how can companies avoid filtering out strong candidates due to overly rigid certification or degree requirements?
Yeah, I think this is such a good question. I think having a nice balance between those hard skills and soft skills, I think, both of the panelists have talked about this so far, but when you're posting for jobs, what are you really looking for, right? Those technical skills you can largely teach with on-the-job training. How are you also balancing that with the soft skills? So how are you measuring of a potential employer if they are agile or adaptable or a good problem solver, right? Those are a little bit harder, but making sure that job descriptions have those embedded in them. And then also through the interview process, really honing in on those pieces, because that's really what's going to be important for a potential employee to really be successful is, can they adapt, right? We know the workforce is evolving rapidly, and so how do we make sure that individuals can adapt as things change, right? You don't want to hire an individual who's so rigid in their specific skill set, and then things change in your industry and they're not able to evolve and adapt. I think also thinking about how are you balancing kind of the preferred versus the required pieces in a job description, right? IBM just recently, we have really honed in on being a skills-first organization, and so we've actually eliminated 50% from 50% of our job postings a requirement for a 4-year degree. That doesn't mean that it isn't a preferred piece, right? We sometimes still have that in a job description, that it's a preferred piece, but we've actually eliminated the requirement. And I think that that's huge because we're really looking at individuals who maybe have different experiences, different backgrounds to really fill some of our positions today.
That's fantastic. And look, completely understand, particularly after 30 years in government contracting, if you are providing custom consultancy services and you're working on a GSA vehicle, you very likely do have some sort of degree requirement. So we're not saying every position doesn't require a degree, but I think that really taking a hard look at required versus preferred, particularly for internal positions, I think it bears consideration. Am I right?
Yeah, I was going to add, I think that's great to hear the skills first and hiring and the balance between skills. And I think it's great that we're at the NICE conference where we live in by the NICE framework. So if you look at it, the NICE framework has been existed, thank you, Rodney, and the NICE organization, and evolved in so many different ways. And they define through their 52 and growing work roles the knowledge, skills, and competencies needed for each work role. So if we could help kind of organizations and hiring officials focus, like you're saying, on what are the skills that are needed for the job, what is the knowledge, what are the competencies, rather than all this kind of stuff that would help, unfortunately eliminate candidates, I think that would be great. And thank you to NICE for making that possible.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to hiring practices. Godfrey, can you describe how you and your technical teams collaborate with your HR and your talent management teams to try to identify the strongest candidates?
Thanks for the question, Todd. The challenge really for us is not so much the strongest candidate, but recognizing where we are in the global marketplace and the fact that the persons we're trying to attract in a low resource environment are being courted by the Googles and the Metas. So what we have to do is to look at how best we can sustain a talent pipeline into our organization to move the rotation rate from a 6-month period to, say, 2.5 years, 3 years. And so what we've been forced to do is to go into the universities and the high schools to look at their final year students and to do talent spotting. Those persons are then brought into the CERT as interns for a year, and we see how they operate. If they meet the cut, then they're offered a 3-year contract as a Tier 1 SOC analyst. And we invest in them in a way that allows them to recognize that while there may be higher paying jobs elsewhere, you've got the ability to be part of a national effort that allows you to have upward mobility within the CERT, but also to impact the creation of capability and building capacity within a nation state that has far-reaching impact compared to just building a career in a multinational corporation.
And that is something that we have seen internationally is appealing to the sense of mission. It is a unique mission when you're dealing with a national level CERT. And it offers a unique perspective that commercial opportunities often can't, as well as doing something for your country. It's a different way to serve your country, and oftentimes that is what keeps people in jobs that, as you said, in a low resource environment, it's long hours, it's weekends, it's your sacrifice. It's a different kind of sacrifice than wearing a uniform, but it's one that's just as important. Kiki, What are some things you talked about eliminating? Half of your positions have eliminated a degree requirement. But as there's a lot of discussion around unconscious bias, conscious bias in hiring process, and particularly when we talk about trying to expand the top of the funnel and we heard it yesterday in one of the breakout sessions, and looking at non-traditional candidates that are coming out of the university pipeline, or even out of the boot camps. What are some practices you've seen at IBM that have been helpful in raising awareness about unconscious bias and how to address it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I want to answer it in two parts. So I think the first part is one of the things that we really look at when we're looking at kind of alternative education is looking at individuals who maybe have diversified their skill set, right? So maybe they have a 2-year associate's or a 4-year degree in cyber, but then what are their other skill sets that they bring to the table? So oftentimes we're looking at candidates who have industry-backed digital credentials to kind of build up that piece. And so maybe they have really dived into AI, right, or IT. And so the more that we can see the diversification of their skill set, that is really something that we look for, especially know that industry is changing so rapidly, and those just provide more backing to who the individual is and more experience. So that's one piece. I think for the unconscious bias piece, another thing that we really look at is we have kind of cross-collaborative teams that are hiring for different positions. So when we're hiring for a cyber position, we're not just having cyber folks in that area be the hiring managers. We're really bringing in individuals from different organizations within IBM to really provide insight. And sometimes, that beginner's mindset mentality of they don't necessarily have that specific technical background is actually really, really helpful to determining if a candidate is qualified or not. So that's one way that we address kind of that unconscious bias piece.
Excellent. I know another thing, and there are any number of research pieces on it, but anonymizing resumes, taking out references to gender, taking out the universities, because those of us who are football fans hate all the other teams. And that's another way that you can eliminate that bias. And some of those studies are startling in the different outcomes from anonymizing resumes. Let's move to credential verification and assessing those skills as you're going through the hiring process. Iman, can practical assessments, and we talked before about using a CTF as a talent spotting type of activity, but lab simulation, how could you see those supplementing traditional screening activities, where it's just where it's either a Zoom call or you're sitting and you're talking through a script of questions that you've negotiated with HR?
I think they can really play a crucial role towards making sure that, like you were saying, you find a good fit between the candidates and the global marketplace and the job role. Because, for example, let's look at a simulation as an example, right? We can map the details of that to a work role, right? We can first take a job description and map it to a nice framework work role, which is what we do in our program at the University of West Florida. And then we can map the simulation or exercise to the knowledge, skills, and competencies needed for that work role. So, for example, if you're hiring for a system administrator or a network security engineer or a cybercrime investigator, the NICE framework defines knowledge, skills, tasks, and competencies needed. Well, then you can build that into the simulation and then have the assessment of the simulation directly let you know how ready they are in those areas. So not only is it it's a great learning tool, but it's also a great evaluation measure because you can drill down into the details and see what their strengths are, and also see maybe what gaps they may need. One of the things that we've realized, for example, at the program we've launched at the University of West Florida, the National Cybersecurity Workforce Development Program, which we launch in partnership with universities across the country, is that we can't treat cyber as a one-size-fits-all approach. There isn't a single on-ramp and there isn't a single off-ramp. So the more we can help identify what is each individual's strengths, passions, interests, and backgrounds, and then map them into a learning pathway that aligns with that, they have a better chance of then succeeding in whatever work role they get, because it's something that is a good fit for them.
And really, it's about setting that candidate up for success. It's not about, I mean, we heard, again, at one of the breakout sessions yesterday, one of the speakers said the guy knocked it out of the park on the interview, but because there wasn't any sort of practical skills test, they got there and they were very, very disappointed with the guy and required a lot more work than just doing that type of technical assessment during the interview process. Godfrey, how do you balance certification requirements with the real world skills when you're recruiting for job cert and for those technical positions, either at that entry level, as you talked about, doing talent spotting in the university or in the high schools, but then also when you get a candidate who comes in through a more traditional avenue.
So thank you for that. And it's a very good look at how the industry is changing. And one of the things I look for on that panel is just how closely those certifications run into each other. Because sometimes you find a candidate that's very well lettered, but the certifications are done back to back, which means he really or she comes to the table with little or no experience. And if you're really trying to hit the ground running in a situation where individuals have to be multi-hatted, then you're looking for that balance of skill sets. Additionally, you try to get them to run through scenarios where their credentials are tested against real-world examples of issues. And sometimes you find that while they're theoretically well-grounded, the ability to apply that to a fluid situation does not bear out the certifications. And so the recruitment process is a fairly detailed one for us, and it is so because we can only take so few of the candidates, but we need to get the best of the bunch.
Right. How many positions do you have open right now?
So right now we have 3 positions open. The idea by the end of the year is to increase that to 50 as we transition from what we have now, which is an 8x5 by 52 bodies in seats, to a 24/7, 365 bodies in seat. So what we're moving from is monitoring over weekends and public holidays to bodies on weekends and public holidays. And so those skill sets are necessary as we seek to get people who can come in and with basic introduction to our systems be able to hit the ground running and provide value to a system. The challenge we face now is that while we have those positions filled, and they're there from Monday to Friday, and sometimes on weekends, depending on what we're responding to, the challenge is that their skill set has to be such that they can work largely independently of my supervision. And so it becomes a bit of a challenge because the ability to get third-party IR or other analysis isn't necessarily there from a procurement standpoint. So the ability to really test those skills from the get-go is critical, and it doesn't happen sitting in a room asking questions.
Right. Okay, so we've walked through identifying the gaps, improving hiring processes, and talking about some skills assessment. So now we've got them on board. Now we got to retain them and develop them. So, Kiki, how important is internal mobility, upskilling, continuous education in retaining cybersecurity talent?
I think it's huge because we've identified how hard it is to hire individuals, so it is really important to retain them. I'm speaking on behalf of IBM, and so we're a large organization. We have a lot of resources, but one of the things that we do is the moment an individual comes into our organization, they're partnered with a buddy. They then identify kind of a mentor that they're with for several months, if not years. We have different business resource groups that are focused on women in technology. We have BIPOC groups. We have LGBTQ+ groups. So it's really an opportunity for individuals, especially at a large organization where it can be hard to connect across the globe, really. And so I think the more purpose that they have at an organization, the more connected they're going to feel, more likely they are to stay in that position. There was an interesting study, it's quite old now. I want to say it's maybe 10 years old, but Morton and Hansen did a study where they looked at 500 organizations and they measured individuals based on their passion for their job and then their purpose, their sense of purpose within their organization. And then they crossed it with how successful is that employee. And they have different, criteria of what it means to be successful as that employee. But I always reference this study because I think it's so interesting, because what came out of it is actually the individuals who are more successful in their job have a clearer purpose for what they're doing. And I just think that this is unique because we always talk about, find a job that you love, have a passion for it. And while that's important, what we're actually seeing with this study is that it's actually more important to have a clear purpose. And so I think that's really an important piece as we're hiring individuals and as they come into your organizations to retain them. What is their purpose, right? Going back to Simon Sinek and his golden circle and his why. Why is an individual there? What is their motivating factor? How are you helping develop that purpose over time, and how is it changing over time? So I think that that's a really important piece to retain employees.
I think that's a great point, and I think another one in addition to, and that purpose is one of the reasons why in public institutions you can find people who are willing to forego the money chase, yes, because they feel that sense of purpose. Mm-hmm. And the other is the opportunity for a unique type of challenge. Mm-hmm. Several breakout sessions yesterday talked about, particularly in cybersecurity roles, mm-hmm, if you've been doing the same thing for 6 months and you're not finding new challenges to address, then you're getting stale. And so, yes, and we CRDF have lost people because we haven't been able to, during lulls in the business cycle, we've lost talent because they haven't had that challenge there to feel like they're being pushed farther and, mm-hmm, to grow their skills. Mm-hmm. Iman, what are some of the top factors driving attrition in cybersecurity, and how do organizations get out in front of that so that they're not constantly filling vacancies, but rather doing that retention after all the hard work of getting them on board?
Yeah, well, I think I completely agree with what Kiki was just saying, and I think, and Todd as well, that it's important to really kind of emphasize the mission, right? That is a big factor for why they get in. And so we have to start with the recruitment before we get to the retention. I think another key factor is really creating that alignment for them and helping them on a path. For example, the program that we run at the University of West Florida has helped train over 3,500 veterans, first responders, and transitioning military, and help them launch or advance cybersecurity careers, all for free if they're eligible. We try hard to do that. But we hear a lot of them when they come in, they say, I hear cybersecurity is a great job potential, and they don't know anything else beyond that, right? And so what we try to do on the front end is help them identify first learn about the different roles that cybersecurity involves, right? Because there's a lot of different roles, whether they're technical or policy or management or investigation analysis. And so we try to help them learn about kind of the spectrum of what cybersecurity is, but also help them align. So we've worked with a partner to develop an aptitude assessment test that helps them identify not only their strengths, what are their strengths, but also is mapped to the NICE framework, so that then it'll help them identify which cyber work roles they may be a good fit for. And then that might help them with kind of what Kiki was talking about in terms of finding a purpose, because, for example, it might help them identify that they're really good at analysis. So maybe a career as a vulnerability assessment analysis or open source intelligence analyst may be a good fit for them. Or it might help them identify that they're very good with coding and technical skills and maybe go into that route, or maybe they're going into policy. So I think creating that alignment is important as a first step so that they're not just kind of jumping into the wide world of cyber. But then beyond that, like you're saying, creating the initiatives and opportunities, they're going to help guide them. So we try to provide mentoring support, also professional development support along the way. Like, let's look at your resume. Let's see what it could do to be enhanced. Why don't we, with our employer partners, if you're interested in the room, we host mock interviews, right? Where, or career information sessions where you can help them kind of develop their interview skills so that they're ready. So I think a lot of that goes a long way towards building confidence and also building kind of their passion and readiness so that, like Godfrey mentioned, they're ready for the job from day one. They're excited about it and they're ready.
What all of that, what is wrapped up in all of that is collaboration between the technical teams and HR, because most organizations have some sort of a what is your roadmap for the next 18 months. We certainly do, where you lay out your individual development plan of what are you going to do to prepare yourself for the next position, and that needs to be a collaboration between the talent management team, the C-suite, and understanding that there needs to be an investment in that continuing education, so educational incentives and benefits, and then having a structured map with the hiring managers to understand that you're the one who is engaging with the employee, and you're the one who needs to be their champion for moving down that roadmap of how to prepare themselves for that next position, preferably internally, not feeling like they have to go somewhere else in order to get the promotion.
Yeah, that's such a key point, Todd, and I think that's really been a missing link is kind of getting HR involved, and I think more recently, the more I realize that, I've been saying, let's include HR in all the conversations, not only internal meetings, but conferences like this, so that they can hear from our perspective, from the global perspective, what are the challenges and how can those job descriptions, like you're saying, be revised, because a lot of times that's where kind of the rubber hits the road, right, is they get to HR, the candidates, and then they're like, oh, I need 4 years of experience for an entry-level position.
Okay, so I want to move on to one of the primary topics of the panel in terms of data and emerging technologies and how to both use those in filling those cybersecurity vacancies, and then also the impact of these emerging technologies on the cybersecurity roles. Godfrey, what are you seeing at the practitioner level? You're at a national cert. You're dealing with threats from a variety of different threat actors and vectors. But how do you see? What do you see as the promise of emerging technologies like AI enhanced tools, as you've got to fill, if you're trying to fill 50 positions over the next, presumably you don't have time to have one guy just sitting there looking at logs all day and trying to correlate things. So what do you see as the promise of AI as you're either going through the hiring process or incorporating those tools into, so not only incorporating the tools into, are you seeing AI-driven threats? Because we saw yesterday that was one of the big concerns, was AI-enhanced threats that where there are not skills available to address those. And I know I'm sorry I asked you 3 questions at once, but I had an epiphany halfway through.
That's fine, Todd. And it's a very probing question. The challenge we face with artificial intelligence is that we have to incorporate it at all stages along the continuum. So from recruitment, the use of AI algorithms to really whittle down the applicants to that shortlist that you can focus on. Once you get inside the SOC, you really need to appreciate that you won't have enough bodies to look at the threat environment. And so the use of advanced tools, particularly leveraging AI to determine and to detect threats, but also to recognize patterns, to look at the logs that you would have created over years, decades sometimes, and to be able to derive patterns out of that so you can use what you're not finding in the TTPs to actually build defenses against the unknown unknowns. And then you have the need for your bodies to learn artificial intelligence to the point where they can appreciate where the biases may crop up or exist in the tools you're using, and to leverage those. Within our situation in Jamaica, and by extension the English-speaking Caribbean, it's small socks. The average size is about 7 persons. What we're attempting to do is really a first of its kind within the region. And so what we're seeking to do is to leverage the technology in such a way that it is not only seeking to identify those sophisticated threats, but also to allow for the more clinical apportioning of scarce resources to where it is most needed. Additionally, when you look at the different sectors, particularly education, manufacturing, health, finance, there has to be the ability to see beyond the horizon with respect to those. And AI and its predictive capabilities are allowing us to do that. As we move from the use of primarily generative algorithms to agentic algorithms, it allows us to have a significant force multiplier that we really need in the low resource environments.
Excellent. Iman, and I will admit this question came from ChatGPT. What emerging technologies show the most promise for transforming cybersecurity workforce management?
Well, given that the question came from ChatGPT, I have to say AI and generative AI then, right? Just to get ChatGPT's approval. But I really have been, I'm passionate about AI. I've been so for about 30 years, involved in AI R&D. And I have to say, what I'm advocating for now is, like Godfrey's saying, is embed AI into everything, but at the appropriate level, right? And so everybody, including our friends, family, neighbors, needs some awareness of AI, but then those on the front line of a SOC need AI that's more technical, more relevant to what they're doing in terms of their analysis skills, right? And I think it's crucial that as an educator, we build in those knowledge and skills now. We start building in those knowledge and skills, not just at the higher ed level, but starting in K through 12, because the world is going to look a lot different in 2 years, 5 years, and 10 years. It already is at this point. So we need to start thinking about the skills that are going to allow them to leverage AI, analytical skills, flexibility, creative thinking, creative analysis, right? Because think about when you ask ChatGPT a question, you're going to get lots of different options. You're going to need to evaluate, parse out what makes sense and what doesn't. And I think from a cyber perspective, it's important to think about what are the specific knowledge and skills that they're going to need based on the work role. I'm part of a group that worked with the National Science Foundation and NSA last year to develop AI and cybersecurity curricula that's now being adopted across the 470 National Centers of Academic Excellence across the U.S. And that curriculum is free, by the way. I can point you to the website for it. So the goal, again, is to kind of figure out, based on, are they going to be in a role where they're applying AI, they're leveraging AI tools in order to enhance cyber defense and cyber resilience? There's one set of knowledge and skills that they need for that. Or are they going to be building secure AI systems, which is really crucial, as you pointed out earlier, because if we adopt AI that's risky or that's not secure, we're actually creating weaker cyber defenses instead of strengthening our cyber resilience.
That's a great point that it's cliche to say that AI is going to transform the workplace. I'm still waiting for that paperless workplace that we were promised in the mid-90s. That doesn't seem to be coming anytime soon. I think it's safe to say that there have been hundreds of thought pieces on how AI is going to change your workplace, and the way it actually ends up happening is going to be different depending on the context, and it's probably not going to look like most of what was projected, because people are going to find new and novel ways to use it to make their lives easier. Now, that also means bad guys are going to find it new and novel ways to make their lives easier too. As we look at the emerging technologies, Kiki, what is IBM doing to incorporate emerging technologies like AI, like I'm sure IBM is working somewhere in IBM. Someone's working on post-quantum cryptography, quantum-resistant types of things. But what role are you seeing emerging technologies play in IBM? And of course, IBM, one of the innovators with Watson of AI as well.
Yeah, so a couple of things. So we have a platform that's called IBM Skills Build, which is a free platform offered to anyone. If you're interested in learning more about it or becoming a partner to really integrate it in a strategic level, I'm happy to talk through that with you. But really, it's a free platform, really to upskill and reskill individuals on various topics such as AI, cyber, IT support, cloud, etc. And so we have actually committed to upskilling 30 million people by 2030. We're about 53% of our way to hitting that goal with over 16 million people who have upskilled today, which is very exciting. Really, we created that, though, to emphasize the importance of these domains in every sector, right? It's not just in the tech sector, but it's really how does AI influence every sector today, and how do you become upskilled or reskilled dependent on your background and experience. So that's actually a platform that we use kind of externally, but we also use it internally as well. And so every IBMer is required to go through a certain amount of hours of learning and then incentivized if they go beyond that. And so a lot of employees use that platform to upskill or reskill. We have a lot of courses on artificial intelligence. And then it's really interesting too, I was part of a workshop on Sunday where I was talking about the work that we're doing for, we're part of a consortium with 8 other tech institutions that are really analyzing what is the impact of AI on ICT jobs. And what's really interesting is as we dug in and we identified kind of the job roles and the various skill sets, what we really found is where AI skills are most needed are in responsible AI and AI ethics. And so it's actually less technical, but really understanding, how do you use AI responsibly? How do you use it in an ethical way? How do you make sure you're not putting in, PI that's going to cause issues down the line? And so how do you use it in those specific ways? And then we saw like the third skill set is prompt engineering, which becomes a little bit more technical, but anyone can become a good prompt engineer. And so I think that really investing in employees, both internally and externally, to begin to close some of the gaps that we're seeing.
Excellent, thank you. Godfrey, as our lone government representative on the panel, what role do you see government policy playing in either standardizing or incentivizing better cybersecurity hiring practices?
I think the greatest role that government can play is to be a facilitator and to ensure that when we talk about public-private partnerships, we're not just talking about bringing 2 entities together, but we're talking about a long-term value-adding partnership. So if you look at how the education system is, government policies drive the development of curricula and the application and delivery of content. That has to be agile enough to recognize that technology is changing, and the ability to infuse it at all levels from K-12 through postdoc is necessary if you're going to build a skills pipeline. Additionally, the private sector has to recognize where their gaps are, where their needs are, and be willing to not only engage with academia, but lean forward sometimes. And what you find oftentimes is that the private sector and academia, they're not talking the same language. So you're churning out graduates with particular skill sets, but the industry is not requiring them. And so government really has to play that balance, that conducting role between the different aspects of society to bring the training delivery to the technological and economic requirements of the society, so that when you look at the economic development itself, what you're finding is value adding at every stage of the chain, and ultimately that skill set, that pipeline becomes sustainable, because even if they rotate out of the public sector into the private sector, you're still maintaining that growth in terms of the ability to deliver cybersecurity within your economic style.
And one of the just facts of life is that academic curricula can't keep up with the pace of change. It can take up to a year to change a curricula, do all the pedagogy behind it, to teach the teachers how to train the new material. And I think that is where, from an educational perspective, things like micro-credentialing and smaller bite-sized certifications can help fill that formal education gap that just takes, it's turning a battleship. It's, you can't just throw new stuff into a curriculum based on that need.
It's interesting you say that, but in many of the smaller economies, government is the largest employer. And oftentimes the requirements to get into the public sector is really based on 50, 60 years ago, when you needed to demonstrate through the acquisition of a 4-year degree that you have certain competencies. So they're being able to leapfrog and to recognize micro-credentialing, to recognize certifications that are not based on those formal degrees and employ these persons will send a signal to the private sector that you can do this and you can be successful at it.
Excellent. We are pretty much out of time. I've got one question for the panel. What is one hiring practice in cybersecurity that you believe is outdated or needs to evolve immediately? Iman?
Degree-based hiring, move to skills-based hiring.
I would echo that. That's what I was going to say as well. I think it's important to look at skills first, and then again, what we talked about, preferred versus required.
Right.
Taking both comments, be disruptive, be bold in how you recognize talent and give opportunities to those whom you find in your recruitment phase.
Excellent. I want to thank our panelists. Please, a round of applause for the panel. I forget what's next, so we're either going to go to a break. Oh, Brian's up. Okay. We're going to exit stage. Good luck and good hiring, and go fill your vacancies.
And by that was a very respectful off the stage. I wasn't.
Good job.
Thank you.